Hello folks, welcome to Outdoors with Bud. I'm your host, Bud Fields. You ever watched that movie of Dr. Dolittle? One of the things he always said you had to do was talk to the animals. Well, a lot of people don't realize just how vocal a deer is. The deer communicate in a number of ways. They stomp their feet on the ground, and actually some of that vibration from the ground, the deer next to it can feel that, and they know something's wrong. But there's a series of noises that they do make that they communicate, where like if I'm talking to you, I can say, "Good morning, how are you?" That's not the way the deer do it. They make guttural sounds that's coming from their throat and their vocal cords. And I'm going to show you some information today about how you can communicate with deer. When I started deer hunting back in 1964, they took me out in the woods and they said, "Now look, you got to sit here and you got to be quiet because you're going to scare the deer." Now they've got guys out here using these calls, and it's almost unbelievable the results they're getting. Now, the thing about calling, you don't want to call too much. You don't want to call and educate the deer. The deer are used to the noise that they make and the communications they make. But there's certain ways that you can do it, and there's certain times to do it. Now, when's the best time to call? I don't like to blind call. If I'm sitting in my tree stand and I'm not seeing any deer, a lot of people, if they're not seeing any deer, they get the calls out and they start making the noise trying to bring a deer into them. Well, what they don't realize is sometimes they're scaring a deer that's right behind them, and then all of a sudden they hear these noises and they run. What I like to do, I like to wait until I see the deer, then I try to call the deer and see how it reacts. If you call the deer and if it stops and looks at you, you've got that deer's attention. Well, then you want to give him a second noise to get him to come in. Now, the closer the deer gets, the quieter I call and the less that I do call. But here's some of the things that you can do. This particular call I got here is the extinguisher. I can take this one call and I can get the sounds of 5 different deer. Okay, I'm gonna adjust this and show you how you adjust it. Now on the front you've got a tube where you can move that tube around and actually project that sound. Like if I want the sound to come from over to the right, I can just simply turn that tube around and make that sound project that way. The same way if you want it to go to the left, you just kind of turn it to the left. Or if you want it from right in front of you, you just leave it where it is. Sometimes I'll put it down, and I like to use my hand and put it over the end and kind of cup it and squeeze it a little bit. Now this first sound that you're going to hear is going to be, that's the sound of a fawn. Now that might not be that loud to you at first, but since we're videoing it here, I'm trying to make sure that you can hear it. Now the fawn, of course, everybody knows that that's the young deer, buck or a doe, and a lot of times they will kind of whine and you hear that little fading out on the end. That's me squeezing this. Now that's the fawn. Okay, this next one you're going to hear is going to be the doe. It's going to be the same sound. It's going to be a little different pitch. Now, the next one down is going to be a buck, a little bit lower. Now, this last one is the dominant buck. So to speak, it's going to be the Mike Tyson of the woods. He's going to be the big boy, a little deeper. I always tease some of my buddies, I said, if you do this, and you don't get a deer, you can always get a job in a rock and roll band, you know, playing the deer call. Matter of fact, everybody knows Jeff Foxworthy, the redneck guy. I sent him a joke. We was babysitting one of our grandkids. I gave my grandkids a camouflage baseball cap and a deer call, and he was walking down the hallway while we were babysitting, and he was blowing the deer call, and he was picking his feet up and down. And I told my wife, I said, you might be a redneck if you've got a grandkid that blows the deer call in the high school marching band. Well, I sent that joke to Jeff Foxworthy. He responded to me that he liked it. He said, I'm a deer hunter. He said, I should have thought of that. Well, I never got any royalties out of it, but at least he knows who I am. Now, the thing about it, when do you know what to call? If you're a bow hunter and if you want to shoot a doe, one of the best calls to use is the fawn call. The reason I say that is, like in October, the first part of October, when deer season comes in, the fawns are completely weaned. They're not dependent on the mother. They followed her around since they were born. She's showing them where they can bed down, where they can water, where they can eat. And she's really nurtured that fawn. But by deer season, they're not dependent on the mother because they're weaned. Now, I was telling one of my buddies, if you want to shoot a doe during the bow season, sound like a fawn. You can have a bunch of does out there, and if they hear a fawn, they like to come in and check out the fawn. So if you want to make a sound like this, if there's any does in that area, they will come in. Now, there's no guarantee on anything, but I've had does come in. I could almost reach out and touch them. I was sitting down on the ground next to a tree just like I'm standing in front of, and I had my son with me and he was videotaping. I was sounding like a fawn in distress. Now, even though the fawn are not dependent on their mother, the maternal instinct of the does, if they hear a fawn in distress, if there's any doe within earshot, she's going to come busting in. She don't know whether that fawn is being attacked by coyotes or any other kind of predators, a bunch of wild dogs, but they will come in. Now, if you're going to use the fawn in distress, you got to put a lot of realism. For instance, if you're out in a boat and you can't swim and you fall in and you need help, you're not going to go help, help. You're going to help. You're going to really broadcast it. This sound now is going to be imitating that sound of a fawn in distress. And if you do this, get ready, because any deer in that area, especially the mothers, even if their fawns are gone, they will still come in and try to protect it. Now you notice at the end, I kind of started softening that up. As that fawn is struggling, it's losing strength. And it's pretty much like, well, it's about over. But I had my son sitting about 25 feet in front of me, and these does come running across the creek. You could hear the water splashing, and you knew they were coming. And he turned around and he said he thought he was going to have to use a karate chop because those deer ran right by him looking for that fawn. Now, this is the sound of the doe. Now that kind of a call is basically like they've separated and they're wanting to gather back up like a flock of turkeys. They wanted to group up. Now, the buck. A lot of guys, when they buy their deer call, the first thing they do, they put it on the monster buck because they want to sound like the bastard of the woods and they want to lure the bucks in. But what you got to remember is you do not want to intimidate a smaller buck. I got a friend that I hunt with for 30, 35 years. He never takes his call off of a monster buck. And he'll be 200 yards away from me, and he's trying to bring in a big buck. But the thing about it is, there's a lot of smaller bucks that he's spooking coming down by me, and I put a couple of them in the freezer because you can't eat antlers, in my opinion. But what I like to do is, instead of being like, now oftentimes they will make a ticking noise, kind of a but like I say, if you're sitting in a bar, maybe you're having a drink and you look over and there's a good looking young lady there, and she's with a guy 5'5" and he weighs 85 to 90 pounds. You're not going to be intimidated by that little guy. You can go in there and have a chance of stealing his girlfriend. But if she's sitting with a guy 6'8", maybe weighs 340, hey, you don't want to go in there and get your butt kicked. I mean, this is something you got to think about. Now, if I had my choice, if I was only going to use one call all year, and I've done it many times, what would I use? The doe bleat. The reason for that is a buck is never intimidated by a doe. He looks at that doe for two things: companionship and reproduction. He's not like you and I. If we want to go out and buy a new truck, oh, I got to go to my wife and make sure she don't care, or I want to buy it. Trust me, I'm talking about personal experience. You want to go out and buy an $80,000 bass bow, then you got to go home and face your wife. A buck don't worry about that. I like to use a doe call. If I'm in my tree stand and I look out and I see a buck deer walking along the edge, first thing I want to do is get his attention. So I'll hit a doe call and I'll use some volume. Okay, and if he stops, I know I've got his attention. So I'll give him another call. If he continues walking, you might as well stop calling because he's not interested. If he turns and starts coming to you, it's going to get interesting, folks. As that deer is walking to me, I'm looking at where I want to stop that deer for the shot. Maybe I've got a bush over here that's pretty much open, or a tree over here. I'm watching that deer come and I'm not calling. Why am I not calling? Well, because as that deer's walking, he's making noise, all right? There's a lot of tree limbs. He's going to be snapping branches, and he's not going to hear that call. When he stops, he's interested. He's looking for you. Well, then I'll use that same call, but I'll make it softer. Now, if he's looking from side to side, that's good. I don't want him looking my direction when I call. I want him to know about where that doe is, but I don't want him to know that I'm there. The closer that deer gets, the better your opportunity. Now, when he's within 5 or 6 steps of where I want to have my shot, I've already got turned around and I won't use my call, but I might make a noise with my throat and my mouth. I'll be back at full draw, or I'll have my gun up, and when I want that deer to stop, I might make a noise like a sheep. And when that deer stops, you're going to have about 3 seconds to execute your shot. But deer calls can work, and they can work fine, but you don't want to use them too much, and you don't want to use them too little. But you don't want to educate your deer. Okay, I'm going to get this other. Okay, another thing that become pretty popular, this originated in the southern states of Texas, was rattling antlers. Now what this does, this simulates 2 buck deer fighting, and you can hear their antlers banging together. Now you can use actual antlers, but a lot of times those are a little more cumbersome. I always had a liking for these Nightingale pack rat. They're made of plastic, and they got a rubber strap there, and I can carry that in on my belt clip if I want to. But what you do, your hands are protected because on the back side, you've got these little handles. You hold them with your hands. And what you're doing, you're just clapping these together, and you're just rattling them back and forth. Now, people want to know what's the best way to rattle. There's no wrong way, because that's just like if there's 2 guys fighting. I've seen some fights last 1 punch, and it was done. I've seen some fights go on for it seemed like 3 days. But when the bucks normally come together, they will kind of push and shove because they want to see who's the strongest. You might hear them kind of hit like that, and then they're turning their heads side to side, and you're going to hear those antlers kind of clicking like that. And then sometimes they'll step back and look at each other like, have you had enough or you want more? Well, then it gets more violent. Now, as you're doing this, keep your eyes looking, because normally if there's another buck in the area, he's going to hear them 2 bucks fighting, and he's going to know what they're doing. Why are they fighting? They're fighting over a doe. He's going to try to come in and sneak that doe away from them 2 bucks before they even know he's in there anyways around it. Now, rattling is not very effective in the first part of the season. Once you see the bucks chasing the does, once you see a lot of activity, like there's buck fights that you can see where the leaves are all tore up, that's the time you want to start doing it. Personally, in my opinion, I believe calling deer is more effective than rattling. I've rattled in, actually, to be honest, more hunters. I've had hunters hear that thinking there's 2 bucks fighting, let's go over and shoot one of them. The minute I see a hunter coming, I'm done with my calls. Okay, I've got another call for you. When I was a kid, I had 2 sisters. They used to have these little cotton baby dolls that had a kind of a squeaker in them that you can lay them down and they would sort of cry. Well, that was from a gravity piston inside, that when you laid it down, it floated and it made a noise. One of the deer hunters, and I wish it had been me, he took that same device and made what they call an estrus bleat. Estrus is when the doe is in heat. And a lot of times, the bucks ain't the only one that's wanting activity. The doe is too. And they use a lot of communications. Now, the way you use this, very simple. Even a caveman can do it. You just hold it in a position like this, you turn it up, then you turn it back. You hear that? Oh, I forgot, I had it the wrong way. Now that sounds like a little lamb. If I tore up a lot of my sister's dolls because I was a mean little kid, the brother. I should have started making deer calls, but at that time I was not into deer hunting. This is a very effective call. I've shot a lot of nice bucks that was walking through the woods and I seen them, and maybe I'd done that twice. And that buck stopped in his tracks, he turned around, and boy, he came in just like I had him on a fishing pole and I was reeling him to the bottom of my stand. Now this is effective during the rut. It's not very good in the early part of October. The early part of October, I would recommend getting a call like that first one that I showed you, that you can adjust it and sound like 4 or 5 different deer. This is particularly effective when they are in estrus. And that sound carries a long way in the woods and you don't really realize it. But like Dr. Doolittle said, you got to talk to the animals, and that's one of the best ways to do it. You're going to sit out there and you're going to wonder, okay, this is a nice quiet day, the deer should be moving. But like I say, I recommend waiting until you see the deer to see how they're going to react, and then do your calling. Well, I hope I gave you some good information there, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you for tuning in, and we got a couple more segments to shoot, and I want to say good luck out in the woods. Take a kid hunting, they enjoy hunting too. We've got one with us today as we're doing this. It's my little fishing buddy, Oakland. Hi, Okie. She's waving at me. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot for tuning in. See you next time. God bless you.